Ho ho ho! Well, it's December and that's another year under the belt. 2021 is a strange one and it's come to the end. Now, true, the cinemas weren't open until about halfway through the year, and some of the early lockdown stuff was kind of bizarre and crazy, and there was a lot of mad, weird stuff and strange events happening. But still, I did see a lot of films this year, and that's what this channel is about. So, some of it was good, and some of it, not so much. But let's cap it all off with a shorter list within some months, starting out with the cinema films first, because I actually didn't see that many films this month. But here's what I managed to get round to. So first up was the very, very much lauded and very highly praised Spider-Man No Way Home. And if you've been following Marvel and Sony things, you'll know that Tom Holland's Spider-Man did a bunch of stuff in Homecoming with Tony Stark, then he tried to hand the mantle over to Mysterio in Far From Home, only to get double-crossed and his identity revealed on national TV by the dying villain at the end of the movie. Well, No Way Home starts right then with him being a big public pariah, and as a result, him, his best friend Ned and girlfriend MJ all end up losing their places at MIT because of associations with Spider-Man and his possible criminal activity. So he decides to go to Doctor Strange and says, "Can everybody forget that I'm Spider-Man?" And he goes, "Okay, magic, magic, magic," but because Peter keeps interrupting him, the spell goes weird, and it all goes horribly wrong, and it leads to people who know Spider-Man's identity from other universes getting pulled into this universe. But most of whom are inexplicably villains. Like, not Kirsten Dunst or Aunt May, anyway. This leads to an awful lot of hijinks as Peter now has to fight not only the police that were after him, but also a whole load of villains from previous Spider-Man movies. And other people come into the story as well, that's all I'm saying. Look, I mean, to be honest, you've probably already seen this film, it's already made billions. So, yeah. Anyway, I thought it was a cute film, I thought it was fun, and it had a big heart, which is why I'm going to give it 3 out of 5, despite the fact that, to be honest, it's a messy script. It's badly paced. The first act is a really horrible mess that has whole plot threads that just appear and then vanish almost instantly with nothing really leading to it, and the dialogue from the villains felt really bad, like most of it was improvised basically on the day, and an awful lot of the shots of them felt like they were like green screen shots that had been done completely separately from the other actors, like nowhere near the set. But ultimately, as I said, it's still an enjoyable film, and I had more fun with it than I did with Far From Home, and certainly more than with Eternals. So yeah, that was that. A load of nonsense that I actually really did like, on the other hand, was The King's Man. So backing up a wee bit and filling in some information, there was a film called Kingsman: The Secret Service a few years ago, maybe you've seen it. It was all about this kind of London street kid who gets dragged off into Toff Central with this secret agency where he kind of does a Men in Black with the situation, becomes the agent to save the world, and then they made a sequel where he saves it again, but to be honest that was a pretty bad film. But anyway, here we have The King's Man. And this is a World War I era movie following the events leading up to the creation of the Kingsman Secret Service organisation in the first place. So, while the older films were clearly, as I said, Men in Black meets James Bond, this is more like James Bond meets Indiana Jones, but shot in the style of the recent Sherlock Holmes movies, and with a little bit of 1917 thrown in for good measure. It's definitely a 4 out of 5. Even if this is, as I said, a pretty silly film, it does manage to take a load of historical events and tweak them into the very daft world of Kingsman, most entertainingly in the way it turns Rasputin, Russia's greatest love machine, into the villain for most of the movie, which is, pretty well done, really enjoyed that, but also fantastic turns from Ralph Fiennes and Jimin Hunsen and everybody else. But I mean, it is nonsense, complete nonsense. But if it's still on at your local cinema and you want something to do on a Friday night, you could do a lot worse than this. But back at home, because those two movies were the only cinema ones I saw, I also saw Margin Call, which was the 2011 movie all about how the financial crash of 2007 started. And it's all about these group of Wall Street slimeballs noticing that everything's about to go pear-shaped, and then they call in a crash midnight meeting of minds to sort it out and decide who's about to get the chop, and what can be done to save their collection of skeezy butts. And this is definitely a 4 out of 5, because honestly, it's a fascinating film, one that has almost no likeable characters in it. In fact, in a lot of ways, this is kind of a homage to Glengarry Glen Ross, like that old film with the David Mamet play about the thin end of the real estate selling market. And also both films have Kevin Spacey. Yeah, remember him? He got cancelled. But it also shares an awful lot with a similar themed movie, The Big Short, which tells the same basic idea, but does it in a much more Adam McKay sort of fashion, with lots of fourth wall breaks and explanations and crazy stuff. But ultimately, Margin Call is a pretty solid film. Speaking of which, Adam McKay also had a new film out this month, which I saw, and that was Don't Look Up. And that tells the disturbingly plausible, if slightly over-the-top story of her off the Hunger Games and him off Django, and They're astronomers who discovered a new comet and then they realise that it's going to hit the Earth. But luckily, they get the ear of the president, who unfortunately turns out to be an idiot and isn't interested in saving the world, but only on how like a comet and the Earth's destruction might actually damage her re-election campaign. So instead, they end up going to the news, who at first are interested, but then because social media happens, they embarrass themselves on a Fox News style show, and then they get discredited despite being right, so now the newspapers don't want to know. It's that sort of film. It's all like one taking a serious situation into the mix of modern life, cynical capitalism, populist politicking, and all of that stuff that seems even more crazy considering this was all written and shot pre-COVID. So even though it actually sounds like it's just making anti-vaxxer parallels here, that's more accident design. It's actually supposed to be about climate change, but there you go. Just shows you people are basically just as stupid the way over in every direction. But what's more interesting of the film is it's kind of a mishmash of the impending disaster films like Deep Impact, but also of Knowing, if you ever saw that weird one. But that along with a big dash of the sci-fi movie Contact, which it owes an awful lot to, and actually has a little sly, cheeky jab at right at the beginning. But it's only a 3 out of 5 for me because although the film was good, it's very slow to start, and the comedy, well, the jokes don't always land as well as they could. But I mean, your mileage vary because, you know, comedy is different for everyone, but yeah, I would still check it out, but just be aware, it's a bit of a slow burn, and it's not for everybody. But, you know, it was December, and that means something. It means Christmas, and that means Christmas films. So in the hope of finding something new to add to my festive viewing habits, I decided to try out a Christmas Netflix movie, one that was shot in my own native Scotland. A Castle for Christmas... oh my god. A Castle for Christmas is insane. Okay. This is the story of an American novelist who gets cancelled because she decides to kill off her famous romantic lead. Okay, right, I know an awful lot of you who watch my channel are big Outlander fans, but this is basically almost like a what-if story. What if Diana Gabaldon got a divorce, and in her rage, she decided to kill off Jamie from Outlander in a really bad way, like having him trip over a banana skin and drown face down in a toilet at the end of the last book. So to get away from the inevitable Twitter storm, she decides to hike away from America and go back to visit her ancestral home in Scotland, where their great-granddad lived on a big estate where he was the groundskeeper.
Come back! Come back! Willie still loves you, oh great one!
Something like that. And then she ends up falling hopelessly in attracted annoyance with the Duke of Dunbar, who also likes her, and you know, look, they get together. It's a Christmas romance film, what'd you expect? Now, okay, this film is nonsense. Not first of all just because, like, the Duke happens to be Wesley from Princess Bride, who's an American who's most famous for doing an English accent, now doing a Scottish accent, and it's a terrible Scottish accent. But also because there's no such place as Dunbar Castle, certainly not in Dunbar. And Dunbar itself isn't a wee village of 150 people like it is in the film. It's like a thriving modern fishing town with like tens of thousands of people living there, and pubs and council estates, and it doesn't look like this. But anyway, for me, this was kind of like a weird fever dream of Scotland. But I will give it this. Even though it's trash, the characters were pretty inoffensive, and the film's completely daft batshit charm kind of had me giving up my antagonism towards the midpoint. Shame then that the actual story sort of peters out and then just meanders needlessly from there until the end. So, I mean, it's 2 out of 5, it's not good. But if you really like Scotland, you really like romance, and you really like Christmas, maybe watch it, you might have a giggle. Everybody else, especially everyone from Scotland, just absolutely skip it, right? Skip it if you like good films, or, you know, your brain cells, because they're going to be jumping out your ears like lemmings during the course of this daft drivel of a movie. But thank the wee man, his elves and his reindeers, because I actually did see a decent movie in December, and it was also a Christmas film at that. Klaus is the animated story of Jesper Johansson. He's like a rich prince and a waster, kind of in the way that reminded me of The Emperor's New Groove, or at least like the first 10 minutes of The Emperor's New Groove, because to be honest, I never watched the rest of it. Sorry, yeah, I know, okay, yeah, one day. Anyway, King Dad decides the only way to make Jesper actually grow up is to send him off to Smearensburg, which is a wee island way up north, where he's got to be the postman for the village there and try and deliver 6,000 letters within 1 year. Only that's kind of difficult because the people who live there are all illiterate, the school is now a fish shop, and the whole town is in a perpetual and violent feud where half the town wants to kill the other half. But before Jesper manages to fall completely into despair, he learns that there's this kind old hermit, like lumberjack guy called Klaus, who lives out in the woods, and he's a great big jolly guy with a beard. You can probably see where this is going. Anyway, he also has a giant warehouse full of toys, and through a series of random events, he ends up getting a letter from a boy, and Klaus decides to give him a toy. And Jesper realises he can convince all the kids in the town to write a letter to Klaus, and then Klaus might give them a toy in exchange, and then he'll ramp up his letter quota. But of course, during the course of the story, they end up accidentally creating this whole mythos around Klaus, you know, from the suit to the toys to the sack to flying reindeer and elves. And obviously, Jesper ends up getting a heart and realising the things that are important in life. Okay, it's a fun family Christmas film, but honestly, it's way funnier than it actually deserves to be. It's way funnier than I would have ever thought it would be. It's got loads of sly humour and clever jokes, as well as a lot of visual gags and actually just silly, daft fun. It's also just a really sweet Christmas film that's kind, clever, and very, very sweet right at its heart. It's one of a proper Christmas classic type that, to be honest, I'll be watching this for years to come. So yeah, I'm going to give it 5 out of 5. So there you go. So I would recommend it to you, I'd recommend it to your friends, to your kids, anybody who loves Christmas. And now, because it's been a quiet month, I thought I'd try something a little bit different. So here, for the first time, is my top 5 movies of the year. And that's the year 2021, just to keep it clear. And these are the choices according to me and to me alone, so if you don't agree, that's fair enough. Please feel free to drop in the comments and tell me what your top 5 were, but we can compare ideas. And in at number 5, it's The Last Duel. Ridley Scott's grand epic knights and chivalry movie that I talked about earlier in the year is a surprisingly low-key but clever swing at power structures, the patriarchy and believing women, all tied up in an amazing bow of brilliant acting, fantastic production design and some really kick-ass sword fighting. In at number 4, it's Dune. Denis Villeneuve's swing and a hit, turning the unfilmable epic of Dune into a cinematic masterpiece, the likes of which frankly hasn't been seen in decades. It's beautiful, it's bare, it's haunting, but it's got enough magic and excitement to ensure a whole new generation of sci-fi fans are going to grow up adoring this universe and being drawn into sci-fi. In at number 3, it's The Green Knight. Now, this is a film that was 100% my jam. Knights, magic, mystery, all shot in a mystical artsy indie style with a narrative that's not completely logical, part meta, a bit bizarre, all tied up with weirdly ambiguous finale, and this is the sort of movie that I completely adore, and I'm really glad that I actually saw it at the cinema and could enjoy this madness exactly as it was intended. And at number 2, The French Dispatch. Wes Anderson's latest movie manages to be both funny, delightful, somber and silly all at once, so basically him just totally running on all engines and churning out something absolutely amazing. I mean, it's probably a kind of a hard ask for people who are unfamiliar with his particular style, but for me, watching this was just fantastic. I mean, stuff like Benicio del Toro being a mad prison painter or Timothée Chalamet being like a slouchy French student, it almost never gets better than this. But for me, the film that took the top spot was Pig. A simple enough movie with Nicolas Cage's hermit truffle hunter on the search for the one thing that he actually cares about in his life, his kidnapped pet truffle pig. And what starts out feeling like the setup for a zany revenge movie actually just turns out to be a fairly sombre and reflective story about attachment, grief, love, human connection and the loss of dreams. I mean, it's a great and beautiful film and one that really deserves to be seen and, frankly, not enough people went to see. So there you have it. My top 5 movies of 2021, all of which bizarrely actually ended up coming out in the latter half of the year. And not a single one was a comic book movie, and all of them were fantastic. I mean, the reason they all came out in the latter half of the year might just be because they were all cinema releases, and maybe that was just enough for me to tip the balance, was actually seeing things back in a cinema. But anyway, why not add in the comments below what your top 5 films were, or even maybe just your number 1 movie of 2021. I'd be really interested to find out. Do you agree with me? Did you see the films I watched? Let me know. And let's get on with enjoying movies for 2022. And just on a final note, I'd like to thank everybody who stuck with me this year, watching my videos, enjoying the channel as much as you can, and yeah, obviously an extra special thanks to the people who contribute to my Patreon. But one thing I was just going to say is, I will actually be shutting the Patreon down. I've actually paused it this month, and I'll pause it again until I've actually gotten around to shutting it off. Because frankly, as much as I absolutely love that people have been contributing to it, I haven't really got the time at the moment to really commit to this channel in the way that I feel I ought to be. So it's easier, I think, for everybody if I just take that away. It takes a little bit of stress off me, it puts a little more money in everybody else's pockets, and yeah, the channel's not going anywhere, my videos aren't going anywhere, but it allows me to just take a bit of a break and take a bit of a slower pace, because I'm already seeing that the next year is already filling up with craziness, and I'm going to be very inconsistent in terms of time. So yeah, just a little note and a little thank you to everybody. But yeah, so until the next video, these have been my grumpy opinions. And a special thanks to all my patrons, and most especially my top tier patrons. Thanks guys, everyone keep it real, keep safe, and take care of yourselves. Bye bye.